Hi, welcome back to EDBEAT. I'm April Cummings of Cayman Life TV, and with me, wait, that way, right? I can't do it. It sounds ridiculous, but if you watch the Brady Bunch, you know they had the little squares, and for some reason I can't convince myself to do this. I know we're very serious professional journalists here today on EDBEAT, playing with double box windows and trying to look left to right. I know. Patrick, thanks for putting up with me, quite frankly.
Hello, how are you?
Patrick, I am good. Patrick, of course, is from CaymanCurrent.org. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to really examining issues around journalism and covering news stories with a very critical eye, and also positive eye too sometimes. Just, keeping an eye on what's going on and keeping the public informed about it. So I ran into Patrick at the Chamber of Commerce Legislative Luncheon this week, and it was definitely a long luncheon, and a lot of the focus was on the premier's speech about the border reopening plan. But prior to that, we heard from President Mike Gibbs of the Chamber, and one of the things he talked about definitely caught Patrick's attention, and mine as well for that matter. And I'm going to use the words to kick it off with education, political football, question mark?
Very good. Basically, the chamber president, Mike Gibbs, was listing a kind of a top 3 or 4 issues that the chamber membership had identified as important that they wanted to engage with the government on. And one of the things he talked about was education reform. And again, he described it as, April, you said, as a political football that's kicked from one administration to another, with each administration having different ideas on what needs to improve and what needs to change. So to kind of get a conversation going between educators and the business community and connect, I think he said connect what's going on in the workforce with what's going on in the classroom, the Chamber's planning to host an education summit later this year. I believe this will be in line with the big economic summit that they do every year, probably similar format. So, fill up a large room full of a lot of people, plan presentations, workshops, trying to get the conversation going. And so Gibbs said they're planning to meet with Education Minister Juliana O'Connor-Connolly to seek her support and partnership. And
So just a quick question, a tiny step back related. When we use the term political football, from my perspective, just watching over the past, and I'm just going to give it the past decade, Patrick, from my perspective, it's almost as though whatever foundation work is there before a new administration comes in, as a incoming minister or politician, your job is, yes, education, but as a politician, your job is to get reelected. And part of the way they do that is by putting their own stamp on whatever is happening or change it around altogether. The problem is you can't always tell what's actually going on. There's so many students, so many schools. We do always get the big pronouncements and proclamations about what's happening, but is the work of the prior administration being undone by the new administration? There are always shifts of position. And so this does have an impact in what policies, how the schools are running. And I thought, I say that political football thing a lot, but the truth is, I don't know if it's a political football, it just feels like one. And that perception can make it very challenging, I think, for parents, students, teachers, and frankly, the community at large. So back to the education forum, though, interesting perspective, well, from my view anyway. There's been lots of talk about education over the past few years, right? Lots of talking. And people do collaborate. How do you think something like this will help do what hasn't been done enough of before?
I think the important thing for something like this to succeed is that a summit like this becomes, to continue with football, it becomes a kickoff event where you basically sit government, private sector, educators around and try to make it clear that everyone is, if not on the same page, at least reading from the same book and that, establish this good faith communication that businesses here want to hire Caymanians, and they want to see young and old people succeed in this economy. And that, really when it comes down to it, everybody is a member of the Cayman Islands and is a person, and really maybe get some core ideas out there, maybe things that everybody agrees on, maybe identify 2 or 3 things that people need to have a lot of conversations about. But then you really, once those lines of communications are established, you need to keep them going throughout the year and over the years. And hopefully something like an education summit would become kind of a big annual event where you're wrapping up and planning ahead for this continuing education conversation.
So, with a conference like this, one of the ideas would be to perhaps set an agenda for what the main issues are. So, use that first year, like you said, to kind of collect all the information together and decide here are the areas we need to focus on, here's what we're going to do. But instead of the next year talking about something entirely different, you would maybe go back and assess yourself against that report card. I'm thinking something more like the, here are the 5 key areas, here's what we plan to do, here's where we actually are, and here's why. Somehow to me, that feels a little more substantive than just a general discussion, because we all have opinions about education, training, what's best, what's working, what's not.
Yeah, and I think the best kind of meetings you can have in business are ones where you have agenda items and then you have action points. So people get on the same page. They're given almost like a list of things to do or a list of goals. And then the next meeting you start off by going over, okay, what were you able to do and not do that we agreed on from last time? So it isn't just a lot of talk, or it doesn't end up just being a social event.
So, if this goes ahead, are there any areas, and I know I'm asking you with next to no notice about this, but are there any areas that you think would be kind of key for that sort of discussion? I mean, there's a lot of talk about being prepared for the workforce, and I had quite an academic argument, if you will. Someone said to me, I don't think that it's a requirement should be a requirement, for example, for the scholarship funding in general, to have to train people or give them an education that pertains to a specific job that they might be able to get after receiving, what quite conceivably is $100,000 or more in scholarship funding. And I'm not sure I believe that that should be the main requirement. Education to me is good regardless of what you do at the end. But it was an interesting debate about what is the point of investing in education. Is it specific skills for specific industries, or is it, more general across the board? But I think those are some of the kinds of issues that need to sort of be pinned down a bit. So we kind of decide, is it one, is it the other, is it a hybrid? What are we doing in terms of education? What are our goals for it?
Yeah, and I think also there's some of these things that were brought up in the election campaign are good indicators of what people generally are thinking about. So if you look at maybe more specific things like special education, inclusive education, the school integration, and the challenges and the related challenge of space in facilities, and
Right.
the demand for private schools compared to public schools. And I think if you convene the right people in the right setting with some small conversations, then I don't want to use the word synergy, but I think kind of the good ideas will become apparent rather than trying to really plan out a whole day according to maybe more of an academic approach where people
Gotcha.
have different theses.
Gotcha. And I did mention in passing the word scholarship, which we also had some big news on this week. I
Yes.
have a child who's about to, head off to school, and for 5 years was just stressing because I thought I'd love for him to go to school at my, the college my parents founded, ICCI. But he spent his whole life here, and I also want him to have that exposure, internationally, to maybe, interact with other students and kids. And all of a sudden I thought, these schools, they're really expensive. So this thing that I would like for him to experience, at least for some of his academic career, looked completely out of reach to me. But then I actually looked at your scholarship directory and guide and saw, wow, there's so much information here that's useful. And there's a lot of different scholarships, but the government scholarship itself now not only has bumped up the amount of funding for just the regular scholarship, but they've added several new categories as well. I hate to say, though, I did ask the question, how much is this going to cost? Because one of the awards, I guess, is that the right word? Potential scholarships is I think it's called the Cayman Scholar, where a top Caymanian male and female student basically get funding to the equivalent of $100,000 a year, that's Ivy League level.
Yeah, and that's really kind of, I think, the point of creating this Cayman Scholar Award is specifically aimed at Ivy League, or they call them gold-tiered universities. Mm. And this has been a concern and point that I've been hearing is, say you have a child get into a Harvard or a Yale or another really expensive American university, typically, and the former overseas university scholarship amount was $20,000 a year. And as you mentioned, they bumped that up to $30,000 a year. Well,
just now.
Yes. So going forward, so that's a lot of money, but when you're talking about a Yale or a Princeton, that's not going to cover your tuition. So the new Cayman Scholar Award goes to the top female and the top male student who are going to attend an Ivy League or gold-tiered university, and the scholarship's good for up to $100,000 a year.
It's incredible, really. As I recall, during the legislative luncheon, too, the premier used as an example, from my view, at least what I heard, because I was punching buttons at the same time. He talked about Jonathan Smelly, who I just interviewed that week about his studies as a molecular, biologist, but he is a molecular biologist at HSA. He's been working on the genomic sequencing project. And, so the goal of the interview was to talk about that, really, because it allows for this, basically specialized information that gives us more information about COVID strains. But I said to him, he was really, really passionate about science. He was really passionate about trying to explain it to me, how it all worked. And in the middle of the interview, I said, well, how did you learn all this stuff, right? And he started to talk about his academic journey and this passion that he had for science and the opportunities he had to feel like he could do something that would make real change in the world. And I thought to myself, gosh, none of the schools he's talked about going to were particularly affordable, for one thing. This is not that practical degree that you're sure you're going to get a job in afterwards. You might. It just so happened that he was exceptionally talented, and HSA was quite supportive, and he was able to get, an opportunity to work on this project. But I mean, when your kid wakes up and says, you know what, I'd like to be an astrophysicist or rocket scientist, and you're in Cayman, as a parent, you're going to look at them like, what? So I just think it's kind of an interesting thing for us to say, you know what, we actually do see value in some of these potential academic pursuits at these world-class universities. I mean, it does show, at least from the outside, a commitment to that type of education. Patrick's like, was there a question in there somewhere?
And I think one of no, wrong. I think this one word you used about this being passionate, and that's kind of something that I look for in education is inspiring kids to really, really, really care about something. And, and it may not be something they end up doing as a career, but what it can do is it motivates them to learn and do more and study and be better generally. And I think that the best teachers, that's really what a commonality they have, is inspiring passion in their students to continue learning and trying outside the classroom. Because as you know, most of your learning in life doesn't occur sitting in a chair listening to somebody talk.
This is true. And as I now have, college age son and high school age daughter, I realized that I didn't spend as much time sharing with them some of the whys for the things I've done and why I chose the career path that I did, or the academic backbone for it. Perhaps when you look back, you might do some things a little bit differently. In my case, I would have probably gotten a little more business to go with my interest in journalism and technology and writing. You know what I mean? Like the business side is something that I had very little interest in initially, but it turned out that over time it became an important component. It would have been nice to have had, I think, a wider base for that. But the thing that's different today for kids is that if you study art in college, there are a bazillion things you can learn online that are more accessible that can help round out that education. But I feel like the structure of a college education is something that some students really, it's kind of a good safe place to start to learn and start to figure out, who you're going to be and how it's going to work in the world, as opposed to throwing me out in the universe at 17.
Yeah.
So also, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a time and a place for everything, and that's called college.
Don't tell my mom. She might be listening. We've had some conversations about my time at college. One other, sort of, I thought, interesting thing that the current is going to be doing, and so the segue here is passion. It's not really education per se. Segue. It's you mentioned that Kayla Young, who's a journalist here in Cayman, is going to have an opportunity to do something that I think is really quite intriguing. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also kind of why you're planning to cover it in your publication, which is online and in the universe? And I keep saying publication, newspapers, radio stations, TV stations, but it's just broadcast publication.
Yeah, so Kayla and I worked together for a number of years at the Cayman Compass. So I know Kayla. We actually went to the same University of Texas, so hook 'em. But
hook 'em horns. Wait, it's like that, isn't it?
So Kayla and I have since, well, obviously me, I left to start the Current, and Kayla left the Compass as well. And then she contacted me a few months ago saying she was interested in applying for a grant with an organization called it's Spanish, so in the acronym is CPI or CPI. So it's a Puerto Rico nonprofit. It's one of the few other nonprofit journalism outlets in the Caribbean, and they're well established and well known. And so Kayla actually won the award. And what it is she and a team of 5 other journalists in the Caribbean, including I think in BVI and I think Aruba and places around, they're going to work on investigative journalism projects about the impacts of COVID-19 and climate change. So the Current has agreed to publish the work, because one of the requirements for the grant is, when Kayla applied, is that there would be an outlet willing to publish the work she produced.
Yeah.
And I thought about it maybe for about 15 minutes, because the Current is we only cover education, and this is climate change and COVID and sustainability. But I thought that this was such a good opportunity for the profession and the advancement of journalism in Cayman, that I thought, let's maybe go a little bit beyond the strict mission of the Current, and be willing to publish what I think is going to be really good work.
Well, I also think it is a testament to ongoing learning and growth, right? So a lot of your focus, yeah, but I do see it that way. It's for much of my career, it's been jump from job at one entity, job at other entity, job at other entity, right? And my parents both having been college professors, always talked about they call it the beauty of the sabbatical. At a certain period in your career, you might take a year off and do things differently for a bit. Sometimes that's travel, it's studying on something else, it's writing a paper, it's any number of things. And I think about that, how valuable that can be for young journalists as well, because you can get very stuck in the daily grind of news generation, and it burns people out over time. It really does, and particularly having dealt with COVID and management changes and just all this kinds of pressures, right? That stuff's just normal. Like maybe
Yeah.
COVID's not normal, but dealing with crises in news is, right? And so the opportunity to really, I think, explore your skills, kind of see how other journalists are working too, and to work on a project that's something you believe in. I mean, I think that's really a great thing to be able to do. And I think it's fab you're publishing it, and I'm going to go see if I can't find a way to do it too, just because I think the more support she has, the better. And I would like to see more of that type of stuff, for people based here in Cayman as well.
Yeah, and I can segue to another topic in terms of local news outlets publishing work by young people. And this is something that Radio Cayman is
Mhm.
also involved with, and so is The Current and The Compass and CNS and Morrow Road and Caymanian Times, and I think Loop as well. So Minds Inspired is sponsoring a journalism and media summer camp in
Mhm.
August for teenagers who are interested in journalism and media, learning more about what's news, what's not, learning really how things work, how to tell a good story. The deadline to apply is 16th July, so put that on your calendars, everybody. And
Do
and
it.
one of the things I for when we were workshopping this with Minds Inspired and with some of the other outlets is how important it is that the journalism work that these young people are producing does get published. So I think it's going to be really cool to see the creative and interesting content that these kids create actually go out and be made available for the public to see.
And I have to say, unfortunately, I'm going to be out of the country while this is happening. I'm quite disappointed about the whole thing. And for those of you who don't know me, I have 1,400 hats and jobs, but I also am news director at Radio Cayman, as well as my work with Cayman Live TV. So I was really excited about this because it's a great age group to work with. And just having this cross section of reporters and journalists and media folks from all the different types of publications, all the different skill sets that are involved. And no matter how you feel about the work of one media entity or group or another, I think hearing across the board from all of them is such a valuable thing as well. One of the interesting for me experiences has been periodically participating in the chamber has the Leadership Cayman program, and they'll periodically have different media entities talk with the group. It's sort of what they call Vegas rules. Everything in the room stays in the room. But for me, it was a great opportunity not just to talk about the industry and what the reality of it's like, but also answer some tough questions sometimes about why we do what we do or why we don't do what we do, or what perhaps was different between. I was often on at the same time as Wendy from CNS, and what was similar and different between CNS and me at Cayman 27 or me at Radio Cayman in the work that we do. And I feel like it's not just useful for the participants in a workshop or a program like this to do what they're doing, but also have an opportunity to hear some of the conflicting messages that we may be giving out, because that is the reality. Is we may all have been received certain, or most of us anyway, have received certain kinds of training and certain types of experience, but we also have worked for different organizations with different philosophies and different experience levels. So I feel like practically it's a great thing, but also not just skills and training, but also the opportunity to work through what makes a story a story. Why Patrick might have you do it a bit differently than April in her, traditional US TV mode might have you do it, versus the community channel Cayman Life version. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something really good about that because it shows people that there are different ways to get there and why this one is appropriate here and this one's appropriate there. At least that's what I'm hoping anyway.
Yeah, I think for the week we'll put the and try not to have an Anchorman style rumble, not in front of the
I
kids.
know. You
But
can do
one of
that
the
on the
things,
break in the parking lot.
one of the things I'm really excited about is learning from the participants, because the older I get, the longer ago it was that I was young. So I'm interested in learning basic things that they'll roll their eyes at me for, like how are you consuming news? What social media do you use, if any? What device are you on? What are you interested in?
Yeah.
So I think even that is going to be
I,
really important as they get older and start spending money.
It'll come, and I have to be frank. It's a very different world in some ways than when I was growing up. I had fewer choices. There is an assault of information coming at them, and so having a greater understanding of what would be useful to them as consumers, not just creators of content, but as consumers of content, and specifically news content, because just because I want to watch cat videos and relax that's not necessarily where I want to go for my breaking news. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I might, but help getting an understanding of what format, what style, how do you want to get your information, and what of the information we give you is of use to you today, even though that may change as they get older. I mean, yeah, you're going to get like a gold star education while passing on journalistic principles, I think. All right, so before I leave you, I wanted to check because I have no memory, I wanted to check my notes because I feel like we did skip over something because I was chattering away.
Yeah, COVID.
Yes, thank you. I knew that was it, because the Chamber's big plan, I mean, the Premier's big plan and the government's big plan was unveiled at the Chamber Luncheon. So let's talk a little bit about the youth component of this.
Yeah, so I guess generally speaking, they revealed, talked about Premier Panton talked about a multi-phase reopening plan that takes 6 months. And currently we'd be in phase 1 of the plan.
Right.
It has 5 phases, and then a full opening would be the phase 6. And that the earliest assessment for that is January of next year.
27th, I think. Yeah, it's like late January.
So when this starts impacting schools is when they start letting incoming travelers in. And just a statistical point that I thought was interesting is so phase 3 is when they start letting vaccinated tourists in. And before phase 3 can happen, which they projected to be September, is now 80% of the population needs to have their COVID shots. That's up from 70%. And I started thinking about it. So I went to some census tables, and actually 82% of the population in Cayman is 15 and over. And so the vaccine is only approved right now for people 12 and over, which is like another 2% of the population. So if you do a little arithmetic, in order to reach the 80% population threshold, you actually need 95% of the eligible population vaccinated.
Wow,
So
that's a
the adult
tough one.
population.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have a great sense of, I mean, you can see who's taken it and who hasn't, but there's a difference between how many people have chosen to be vaccinated and those who have chosen not to. And there's another gap in between. It's people who normally are like me, although I went ahead, who aren't, it's not convenient or easy for them at that point. So they just don't do it yet.
They're gonna.
We're gonna get there. And then they have to travel or something. So there's a scramble at the end. I'm not gonna say that's me, because I was good this time. But my point being, Patrick, that it's hard to get a sense of how many people simply are unwilling to be vaccinated versus people who just haven't got to it yet.
My sense is that there's very little true vaccine hesitancy here. I think people, a lot of people are going to get it. I also think about there's, a small percentage of people who may not be advised to get the vaccination or may
Right.
be
Yeah.
advised by their physicians to wait. So
Hmm.
this would be typically really elderly people who are very, very frail.
Hmm.
It can be, I know there's been some debate over women who are pregnant, even though it's in some countries they've said it's safe, in other countries they say to wait.
Right.
And then there's people with allergies who may not be able to get the Pfizer shot, but can get the Johnson and Johnson one,
But that's not the
and
one
maybe
that's offered here yet. Yeah.
maybe it's just they haven't been able to get it yet, or their doctor is waiting a little bit before they give them the green light. So 95% is a
Steep.
large
Yeah.
number. But back to school. So in phase 4 of 5, which is supposed to happen 14th October, assuming that 80% thresholds reached by September, they're going to start allowing in a lot more tourists. There's going to be a lot more travel, especially by vaccinated people.
Right.
But how this affects schools is children over the age of 5 who haven't received a vaccine, who go travel abroad and come back, they're going to need a negative COVID test before they can go back to school, and that's the PCR. And also, frontline workers will have to undergo survey PCR testing, so they'll just be
Mm.
tested on a regular basis. And the frontline workers include school staff. And so those two testing requirements actually will stay in place through phase 5 of 5, which is when we start letting unvaccinated travelers in.
Right.
I think children, which should happen in November 18th. So basically, kids who travel out and got the shot are going to need COVID tests before they go to school, and
Right.
teachers and everybody else are going to be getting swabs as well.
And there's the also the work that news that work permit renewals or new work permit applications for that matter, it's going to require that they'll have to be vaccinated as well. That I don't know how big of an impact that would have in terms of schools, but I imagine that might affect some admin staff or teachers, something along those lines. So we'll have to
Yeah,
kind of
and I think
kind of
they
see.
were among the first priority workers to be
Yeah, they were the
eligible
first
to get
offered.
the
Yeah.
shots. So they've had a a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah, true. True, very true. All right, anything else you want to talk about before we wrap things up for this week?
No,
It's
that's
like
it.
I have talked and talked and talked.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Patrick. I really appreciate the time. And you guys don't forget to check out caymancurrent.org. Patrick always has great stuff on there with far more depth because, when he's doing it for the website, he doesn't have the distraction of me piping in with various things that may or may not be related to the subject at hand. So there's great stuff there. You're going to want to check it out. And of course, follow us on the YouTube. The channel's Cayman Life TV. You can also that Instagram thing, and we've also got the Facebook. So yeah, when Patrick talks to the young folks, he's going to be so literate in these matters, it's not even going to be funny. But yeah,
You
follow us
put
on,
the in front of everything.
and it's good. The
The
YouTube,
Instagram.
the
Well,
Twitter,
it was originally the Facebook.
It was, it was, which is what set me down this path of enjoying sounding completely ridiculous about the whole thing. People are like, you're not a very good nerd. You say them all wrong. And I'm like, actually, because it's funny, but that's just me. So definitely, though, follow Patrick, follow me, and please send us information about stuff you like to see covered, talked about, discussed. And just if you have questions about some of the stories and issues related to education in Cayman, we'll find time for you, promise. All right, have a
Yeah.
great one, everybody. See
Yeah.
you
Thanks,
soon.
April.